amigos, and let's get this over with. Alright, we should be all healed up. Magic. Pretty good for that. We're all fairly high level. Right, so here's the boss that I really don't want to fight. Really. Guardian of the Earth Dark Crystal, and possibly the hardest boss in the Dark World. Not counting the final boss, obviously. Soon the darkness will overflow completely. Nobody can stop it now. You shall perish here. Oh god. This is Ahriman. And he is not a terribly pleasant feller. Right, so... Cast Cure 4 and hope I go last. And cast Haste and hope I go first. Well, that plan was planned. Ahriman here has a set pattern. He will alternate between casting a strong spell and casting a fairly weak spell. So he will use Meteo, Flame, Quake, Blizzard, Meteo, Thunder, Quake, and Cure 2, and repeat that process over and over. In the DS version, his pattern is changed drastically. And his pattern is changed drastically. I had to crack my voice. Wow, it's bloody brilliant. In the DS version, his pattern is changed drastically. He will cast Quake, he will occasionally cast Quake as his strongest spell, and he will also cast Firaga, Blizzaga, and Thundaga. He also has a physical attack that he will occasionally use, but it doesn't deal that much damage. Compared to how he is in the NES version, the DS version of this boss is a joke. I mean, really. Like, this guy is incredibly easy in the DS version. All of these bosses are incredibly easy in the DS version. But unfortunately, the NES version doesn't do anything like that, so... The best strategy here is to heal on the turns in which he is not using a very powerful attack, apparently. Similar to with other battles, it's best if you have two sages that can cast Cure 4. If you don't have anything along the lines of that, then, having somebody with Cure 4 and somebody with Cure 3 will work just fine. Mainly you'll want to stick to melee attacks, obviously. Unless you have stronger spells like Flare and Meteo, Bahamut is probably going to be your best bet, not best det, in order to deal a large dent in this guy's health. But I'm really not kidding if I were to say that this guy is the hardest of the bosses here. Not counting the final boss, obviously. And due to the semi-random turn order, a lot of times you really just have to hope that you can recover quickly enough from attacks. See, Don's dead, so now we've lost a large portion of our ability to heal the party. Alright, well, we should be able to carry this on. The memory will carry on, dude. Alright, Cure 3. Casts Thunder. Thunder deals, like, heavy damage to Leo all the time for some— Dead! Finally! Thank you! Good night. Oh, man. Can't believe I'm gonna make a separate video just for this. I was expecting, like, a million death montage. Well, I did have, like, a million deaths, but I'm not gonna put those in, obviously, because nobody wants to see that. Alright, let's use one of our Phoenix Downs to bring Dawn back. Oh, man. Alright, story progression. Story progression time, and it's the last of the Dark Warriors we need. I am one of the 4 Dark Warriors. The flood of darkness will destroy not only your world, but ours as well. Both will return to the void. But if we join our forces, we may still have time. Quickly, let us go and defeat the Dark Cloud. Alright, so now we know that hope is the only thing that is able to beat the Cloud of Darkness. And now we have all 4 of the Dark World Warriors backing us up on this. So now the only thing left to do is defeat the Cloud of Darkness, and prevent the world from returning to the Void. I'm gonna save that for its own separate video, because the final boss also will probably take a couple of attempts, and I'll at least get us there. At the very least, I'm gonna get us to where the final boss is before we actually fight it, so... At this point, I'd like to cover a few more of the differences between the NES version and the DS version, so I'll probably put this screen aside and put a little bit of a flowchart and such. Or some kind of visual aid. Now, the DS version changes a lot of the things that the NES version had going for it. The NES version is actually the most difficult of the NES Final Fantasy games. The DS version does a lot to keep the difficulty of the bosses, and the bosses are in fact, well, you'd think they'd be even more difficult since they have a lot more health in the DS version. But not really so. Damage calculation in the DS version is a little bit different so that it deals less damage per hit. But either way, you're still going to deal a large amount of damage to bosses, considering that if you've got 2 weapons equipped, you'll probably still hit 26x. Or 26x by the end of the game. One of the things that changes in the DS version is, note how in the NES version, it kind of punishes you from leaving battles. You can't really do much of anything in terms of... You can't really leave battles. If you run away, the game is going to punish you for that, and you have to take that into account. This game doesn't always play fair. The DS version, thankfully, doesn't do that whole reset your defense and magical defense to 0 crap that the NES version does. At the same time, it has its own separate set of annoyances. Mind you, you still have to go through all the mini-based dungeons, and the enemies have higher HP, but they have lower attack power, oddly. A lot of the areas that are difficult in the NES version are actually kinda easy in the DS version, and a lot of the areas that are difficult in the DS version are easy in the NES version. I'm saying S too many times in one sentence, but what I mean is just... Like, for instance, Heinz Castle earlier in the game. I regretted I was not ready to go into Heinz Castle. Or I was a bit more ready because I knew that it would appear, but Heinz Castle is a lot more punishing and taxing in the DS version, I felt. Most of the enemies only appeared in small groups in the NES version anyway, so the enemies in the DS version were a lot more threatening, both in terms of attack power and in terms of the status problems they could cast. Hein himself was also a major douche in the DS version. Oh, with that being said, Eureka the Forbidden Land, especially in the DS version, is an incredibly difficult dungeon. Like, it took me a lot of tries on the DS version to get through Eureka, and granted I was probably a little bit under level, but it's still a lot more difficult due to the fact that the bosses just have a lot more health. But then when you get to areas like the Silk's Tower and the Darkness World and such, you'll find that the bosses here have been toned down considerably. For example, in the DS version, none of the bosses are able to cast... Well, in the DS version, Xande is still able to cast Meteo, but he casts it pretty rarely, really. So anyway, here we go. Now, I looked up a little list thing and stuff, and actually, it pretty much covered all that it could cover about the game and such. This game in terms of areas that are really annoying and areas where the game gets incredibly difficult. And it listed a lot of areas where, yes, I agree that this game gets incredibly difficult at times. For instance, let's see. It listed the Darkness Cavern, where we had to go with the Dark Knights and stuff. It listed that as one of the most frustrating and difficult areas, due to just the random encounter rate, the false walls, and of course just the fact that it's an incredibly long, incredibly deep, taxing dungeon. The enemies there have dealt more damage than you were used to. The enemies there have more defense than you were expecting, and you also have to realize that splitting gimmick as well. If we were to go back through that, it wouldn't be as threatening now, because we've got higher stats overall. But at that point in the level, where you're on the level you're supposed to be while going through that dungeon, and everything's still kicking your butt, and then it turns out that the boss in both versions of the game is frighteningly easy. And then we have to go through the difficulty of the Dark World, of course, in which we have to fight... In total, we have to fight 6 bosses in the Silk's Tower and the Dark World once we get through it. Not counting the fact that we also have no recovery in between the Ancient's Labyrinth and the Silk's Tower. Oh, Double Dragon! This is a new enemy. Man, I need to play some Double Dragon. For those who don't know about the Double Dragon, it's a arcadey beat-em-up game, and Battletoads kind of teamed up with them for one game. And also the Double Dragon is dead. It's dead doubly. Was Einstein's theory good? Relatively. So anyway, continuing on. Alright. So we're pretty much at the final boss right now. This is going to be a very short video compared to most of these Final Fantasy III videos. But all we've really got left to do is take on the final boss. I wonder, do we actually keep our levels, like, after beating the final boss? Because if so, that would be nifty. Because then I could go through and fight the final boss again. Except I'd have less resources like Phoenix Downs and Elixirs, but I'd come a bit more prepared, at least. I'd come with, say, Bahamut and more Cure 4 spells and whatnot. I mean, that's the big thing about the Dark World. You have to be very prepared in the NES version. You can kinda get away with having a dedicated white magic and dedicated black magic user in the DS version, because they upped the power of black magic in the DS version. So anyway, that's pretty much all I really wanted to cover right now. And that's really all we have to do left, other than beat the final boss. So in the next episode, we're gonna take on the Cloud of Darkness, and finally put a stop to this madness. So until then, this is Tales from Raga, signing out.